It's recognition and acknowledgement. It's very beneficial and helping us maneuver through the process with a little more ease and grace when we know what it is, when we have an idea of what to expect. And that, wow, okay, this is normal. This is part of the journey.
And that's Nadine Roberts Cornish, our guest today on a Season of Caring podcast where there's hope for living, loving, and caring with no regrets. This is Rayna Neises, your host, and let me introduce you to Nadine. Nadine Roberts Cornish, certified senior advisor, gerontologist, author, and national speaker, is founder of the Caregivers Guardian, LLC. With a background in public health, Nadine began her most important role as a 15-year caregiver to her mother. Her personal journey would morph into a now 13-year-old business, TCG, providing coaching and consultation services to family caregivers across the country. CAREEE, Caregivers, Advocacy, and Resources, Empowering Employees and Employers, is TCG's newly minted program for businesses and organizations. Nadine is the author of Tears in My Gumbo, The Caregiver's Recipe for Resilience, and Prayers in My Gumbo, The Caregiver's Recipe for Peace, which are all part of the multi-book Caregivers Gumbo series. Currently under construction is her latest book, Recipes in My Gumbo, a collection of soulful recipes and heartfelt stories by family caregivers. She is founder of the 10-10-30 campaign, 10 random acts of kindness, 10 books to caregivers in 30 days, now in its third year in honor of National Family Caregivers Month, held in November. Welcome, Nadine. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Rayna.
You are such a busy girl. But we'll get into all those great things that you're doing. Why don't you start off by sharing a little bit about your caregiving season with your mom?
Rayna, like so many of your listeners, caregiving chose me. I did not choose it. It was not the vision that I had for my life. I was already living my best life. I did not need any interruption. And one day the phone rang and everything changed. My mom was diagnosed with a pituitary brain tumor. And she shut down the moment she heard that she had a brain tumor. I use the term white coat syndrome sometimes. And a lot of people don't know what that is because a lot of our doctors don't wear white coats anymore.
That's true.
Right. But my mother, upon hearing her diagnosis, basically couldn't hear anything else. And so I immediately became her advocate. I became her partner in the process of learning and understanding what this brain tumor meant, how it was already affecting her, and what we could do about it. And for my mom, doing anything like removing the brain tumor meant that she would likely become blind. And so that made it extremely difficult for her to make a decision. So it took 2 years for her to decide to do something about this very rapidly growing brain tumor.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, we got through that particular part, but we didn't know. I had no idea when that phone rang that my life would be changed forever. I had no idea that my mother's life would be changed forever because as is typical, when you start to deal with one scenario, one medical condition, there are a multitude of others that are waiting around the corner that you can't see, that you're completely unaware of, and you're oftentimes blindsided by. So we went from a tumor to dealing with diabetes and high blood pressure, which led to a massive stroke.
Oh.
And then from a stroke, she had congestive heart failure. It was one thing after another, after another, after another. And my mother would ultimately succumb to stage 4 breast cancer. She had been hospitalized 7 times in the course of the very same year that she was diagnosed at stage 4 with breast cancer. Yes. And so it was one of the most tumultuous, unpredictable, crazy journeys that you'd ever want to travel. But my mother, being who she was absolutely not going to travel that journey alone. I was going to very much be her part, all of it. I had 5 siblings, and on some days I had really good support from some of the siblings, and on other days I felt very much like an only child. And I would say my mother spent the last 3.5 years of her life living with us. We relocated her from her home in California to our home in Colorado. And the quality of life that she experienced was exponentially better once she moved in with us. And it was difficult. There were days where I cried. There were days when I screamed. And there were other days when I said, I'm not pulling my hair out of my head today. I'm not going to do that today. Today, I'm going to find something to punch, you know? And eventually I got to a point where I just decided to stop fighting, because when you become an advocate, when you become the caregiver warrior, you tend to constantly be in battle mode. I was absolutely in battle mode. And I ultimately decided that I was not going to continue in that mode. I was going to stop fighting, and I was going to start accepting. I was going to start surrendering. I was going to start finding grace in this process. And I needed to do that because my mom had stopped fighting. Yeah, she got to a point where she said, enough is enough. But I fought for 2 more years. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And ultimately, I recognized that I need to be on the same page that she was on. I can no longer drag her along to do what I thought was best, to do what I believe should be done. Right. And that was tough because, I was large and in charge. And what I was doing for the most part tended to be working. I knew how to advocate. I knew how to research. I knew that no was the default. And so no never bothered me. I was always ready for it. It was like, okay, bring on another one and bring on another one, because I will wear you down until I get the yes that I am.
I can really relate to that. My personality is that push, push, push personality. And that was definitely one of the things. I think a difference in our journeys is that I knew I was dealing with Alzheimer's and there was no getting better. And so for me, I wanted to push and advocate for the best care. And my little slogan in my brain was always, I want him as happy and as healthy as long as possible. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be forever. And so I literally, the last year of his life, my prayer was, Lord, help me know when to stop pushing. And I really did get that confirmation just 3 days before he passed away. There was a change in him, and there was a confirmation in my spirit that, okay, it's time to stop pushing. He's done pushing. You need to let go and let's walk this all the way to the end. Not easy to hear, but so thankful that I was open to hearing that, because it is so hard. I think we can become like bulldogs. We see our goal and we're getting there no matter what, right? And that means dragging our loved one along, and that can happen. You mentioned that shift that happened for you. Is there anything specific that caused it, or what made you feel like you made that shift?
Yeah, it was a hospitalization that she had, and I think it was probably a year before she passed away. And it was Thanksgiving, and she had suffered a seizure, and we raced to the hospital again. And she asked me, she said, why are we at the hospital? And I said, you had a seizure. And she said, I don't want to do this anymore. I lost track of the number of hospitalizations that she had. And she said, I don't want to do this anymore. During that stay, she coded, and she was a DNR. I was outside of the room when that happened, and I'm watching what's going on. And I couldn't tell them to stop. I couldn't tell them to stop. And she got through that, and she told me, she looked at me and she said, promise me that you'll never have them do that again.
Oh,
yeah. And so that was it. I was finally willing to hear her at that point. And mind you, she hadn't been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was an array of different illnesses. And I say now that all of that was training ground or the work that I would ultimately do. I didn't choose this. It chose me for real. And it is very much part of my calling now. And I know that the various illnesses and diagnoses and experiences that we had were not just for us. I came to understand that. My mom didn't go through all of this for herself. She went through this so that I could be a witness and so that I could literally be a support to other caregivers that are going through a similar journey.
It's a calling. It's such a precious calling to be able to come alongside others and encourage them in the journey. And it definitely is something that we just can't not talk about, right?
No. Yeah, I mean, it's what we're here to talk about, and why it's so important that we share our stories. And I encourage every other caregiver to share their story. Don't keep what you're going through and what you're experiencing to yourself.
Yep.
Your message is important for someone else, even if you can't even imagine how it might impact them or what they can learn from what you share. It's encouragement, it's inspiration, it's knowledge, and it's important.
So true. So what in the world does Gumbo have to do with caregiving?
Okay, well, Rayna, I am from New Orleans, born and raised, or New Orleans, and those who are not from New Orleans like to say. So born and raised, and my caregiving journey was a lot like making gumbo. A whole bunch of different ingredients, a really messy, sloppy process sometimes. Oftentimes you're looking at the gumbo and the ingredients, and it's like, this is a mess. This is an absolute mess. And so is caregiving.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes in New Orleans, we would make gumbo a community. You can make it by yourself. And I liken that to the caregiving journey. You can take care of your loved one by yourself, but boy, it's a whole lot better if you got other people supporting you in the process. And so with gumbo, there's usually somebody peeling the shrimp. And then there's somebody chopping the meats and the vegetables. And then there's somebody making the roux, right? And when you do it like that, there is this symphony of magic that's happening and taking place. And it comes together. And after a while of simmering, a while of cooking, you can't fast cook gumbo.
Mm-mm.
You shouldn't fast cook gumbo. And if you taste it prematurely, it's not so good. But if you allow it to marinate and you allow it to come together as it's designed in its own good time, what's created is absolutely unbelievable. And the caregiving journey, same way. You don't understand half of what you're dealing with while you're in the process oftentimes. But it's afterwards, after you've given it time to marinate, after you've given yourself grace, after you've given your loved one grace, that you realize, wow, there really are some amazing nuggets here. There really are some experiences that are filled with grace. And I really am growing, and my patience and my character and my ability to love unconditionally and my ability to show up even when I never thought I could or would, right?
Or wanted to.
Yeah, right? Or
Yeah.
wanted to, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the correlation for me. And my caregiving journey, it was like, man, this is a big old messy pot of gumbo. But eventually the mess turns into a message. The mess turns into the most nourishing, delicious, amazing meal that you could possibly create. That's the caregiving journey.
I love that. And two people don't make gumbo the same.
Absolutely not. Yes, indeed. Yeah. You can actually make a pot of gumbo this month and have all of the same ingredients and go back and do the exact same thing next month. And they can taste different, still very good, but they're going to be different. And so it's a really unique experience. And it's one of my most cherished dishes because my mom taught me how to make gumbo.
Yeah.
And throughout my life, I never even considered making gumbo without my mom supporting me. And it wasn't until she passed that I realized that, I never wrote that recipe down. I never, ever allowed myself to imagine that there would come a time when she would not be available, when I couldn't pick up the phone and call her and say, okay, this is what time we're going to get started. So, block out 3 hours so we can get this done. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But through grace, I was able to go through the process of making the gumbo, putting together all of the ingredients. And I always say her spirit led me through the process. And I prematurely tasted the gumbo and thought I had absolutely ruined it. And, cried myself to sleep, put the alarm on, and woke up. And I thought I was waking up to a pot of gumbo. But instead, I was waking up literally to the aroma of my mother's gumbo. Right. And so recipes are so important, for families. They're so important for legacy. And so it's the gumbo. It's all about the gumbo. So we created the gumbo series of books, starting with Tears in My Gumbo. During the pandemic, 40 caregivers across the country sent in their offerings for prayers in my gumbo. Yeah. And now we're working on an actual cookbook because everybody believed that Tears in My Gumbo was a cookbook. I've had so many requests for the recipe for my gumbo. And so it's like, okay, we are going to create recipes in my gumbo that will include my gumbo recipe, along with recipes from caregivers across the country, along with their stories, what they want to share around what this recipe means to them and what their caregiving journey has been like.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I mentioned before, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was just 16. And so her ability to have a conversation or to be able to really share her own thoughts was quickly gone. So I was probably 20 the last time I remember actually having any kind of conversation with her. But finding her recipes as a young adult and being able to cook those special dishes that she made, I was so thankful she wrote them down. So many people of the older generation, it's only in their head. And so we can't get it out of that, but it's so important to share those recipes. And such amazing memories come from being able to smell that food, doesn't it? And it is so precious. So that's going to be a neat publication to have people sharing those memories. That's going to be a book that will just share that with people. I think the best cookbooks I own are cookbooks that came from groups and organizations that published them. So it's going to be great to be able to see all the wonderful recipes and read the memories that people are sharing.
We're really excited about it. Yes.
So caregiving is this process that we all go through. What do you say? What is it here to teach us?
So it's a very individual, it's a customized lesson, right?
Yeah.
Some of us, Rayna, are here to learn patience. Some of us are here to learn resilience. Some of us are here to learn forgiveness, right? And some of us are here to learn how to surrender. And there are a multitude of lessons. And the lesson is revealed when we're ready for that lesson, when we're ready to understand what it is, right? I believe it's one of the most transformative processes that we have in our lifetime. When we say yes to the assignment of caring for someone, or when we are voluntold for the assignment. But when we embark upon that journey, we don't know. We don't know how long it's going to be. Oftentimes, we don't know what it's going to ask of us. So many people who are on the outside looking in will tell a caregiver, oh, I don't know how you do. I don't know how you did that. And the caregiver's response is, I don't know how I did it either. I didn't know I could do it. I didn't know I would do it. But somehow you get the strength, you get the grace, you get the capacity to do what must be done in that moment, for that time, for that season. And you simply do it, especially when we're talking about our parents. For most of us, our parents did for us. And oftentimes we don't know how or why they did what they did to the extent that they did it, right? But they did. They showed up and they did it. And I just believe that we all are given the capacity to do that first of all, when we ask for it, right? Because it's not necessarily innate. We have to work on skill sets, and we often have to work on shifting who we are, who we believe ourselves to be, right? I have one friend who was super prissy as a kid, and she became a caregiver. And, if you're prissy, you kind of have to release some of that in order to put on the gloves and dig in there and do what's got to be done, right? Being prim and proper might not get you through the day, And so developing the attributes that you need to develop, grit and grace is one of them. Can-do mentality, a will-do mentality, and I'll figure it out mentality is what we do. We roll up our sleeves and we get it done.
And even sometimes when we look back on our day or on a month before, we don't even know how we did it. But
No.
we did. We found what we needed to do that. And I do think it is important to realize that it is a refining process and it's not easy, but it's beautiful. And you will walk away with so many blessings. And like you said, character development and relationships, just so many things that are so important. So I know you have 5 steps to conscious caregiving. What are those 5 steps?
So 5 steps to conscious caregiving, we're all familiar with them. Step number 1 is typically when we begin the process, begin the journey, it's that feeling of helplessness. This idea of what in the world am I doing here and how am I going to do whatever it is that needs to be done, right? Sense of helplessness. We don't get to spend too much time there, especially when it's an emergency situation and your loved one's in the hospital and they're coming home and life is going to be different. Or there's been a diagnosis that says life from here on out is going to be different. So most of us experience helplessness. And then from there, we go to recognition that we don't know what we don't know. Okay. Especially when we're accustomed to be so competent in all of these other areas of our lives, right? We know what to do. We know how to do it. We know what needs to be done. A lot of times, the caregiving journey, you have no idea. You don't know about the Medicare and all of the nuances associated with Medicare, long-term care. You don't know about that. You don't know whether or not your parents have long-term care insurance. You have to go on a fishing expedition. So recognizing that you don't know what you don't know is a part of the process, makes it palatable. It makes it feasible. Okay, this is where I am and I'm okay. Then from there, we go into process and you're there a long time. In process, you're figuring it all out. You're figuring whether or not you can be a caregiver. You're figuring out what are the resources available, especially if my loved one's going to need around the clock care. What are the facilities? What is a CCC, Continuum Care Community? What does that mean, right? You're figuring everything out. Who in the family can support this effort? Who will support this effort? Is this going to be a deal where I'm going to, have to take the reins, right? Because either my parents can't or there is no one else, right? So process you're working through. You're also figuring out what are your limitations. What can you give? How much can you give based on the reality of your circumstance? And so process is an amazing thing that we're working and figuring out. And then from process, we move into acceptance. We spend a lot of time fighting, being bullheaded, like we talked about earlier. And, we're going to control it. And when we finally recognize that we can't, that we are not as in charge as we think we are, we move into acceptance. And from acceptance, it's surrender. And in surrender, it's tapping into your higher source and recognizing that it's not my will, but it's thy will that will be done. And so this is cyclical. It is not a linear process. You might be in helplessness today, and tomorrow you're moving and grooving into process, and something happens and you're feeling that helplessness all over again. And then you get to a place where you're at acceptance, and you move from acceptance back to recognition. I don't know. Right? So it is just a cycle, very much a cycle that we experience throughout the caregiving journey.
I think it's so important to realize that we don't ever arrive because there is so much to learn. And by gum, if they don't keep giving us new things to learn about, right?
Right?
It's like all the way through the process, you're experiencing one more thing. I often share the story when my dad was struggling with constipation. And I was like, I had no idea poop was so important or how much there was to learn about poop. So there's so much. And the new challenges bring us, like you said, right back to the beginning again of just that, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I don't know how to do all this. And then I would imagine that the sooner we learn that step, even naming the process can be helpful to us to identify where we are so that we can look to move to the next step, maybe a little faster than we did when we were there the first time.
Oh, absolutely. It's recognition and acknowledgement, right? It's very, very, I think, beneficial and helping us maneuver through the process with a little more ease and grace when we know what it is, when we have an idea of what to expect. And that, wow, okay, this is normal. This is part of the journey, right? And so I applaud those caregivers who say yes to learning more, who are listening and who are considering, okay, this is something else that I can do to help myself through this journey.
Well, I love too that you mentioned within process that you're exploring and you're learning, because you learn also who those go-to people are that know something that you don't, or that have experienced it already so that they can point you to resources and be able to move through that phase again a little faster because you actually are asking for help and not expecting yourself to know all the things you really don't know.
Exactly. It's permission.
Yes.
So many ways. Yes.
Well, our time is gone. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experiences, Nadine. Let my listeners know the best way to get in touch with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rayna. And guys, you can reach out to me at tcgcares.com. That's T as in Tom, C as in cat, G as in George, CARES.com. And if you want to chat, you can always give me a call at 303-394-1963.
Listeners, take advantage of all that Nadine has to offer. You will definitely enjoy her book, Tears in My Gumbo. I would highly recommend you check out a copy of that and then just stay in touch with all the great things she has going on. Thanks again for listening today. And just a reminder, A Season of Caring podcast is created for the encouragement of family caregivers. If you have financial, legal, or medical questions, be sure to consult your local professionals and take heart in your season of caring.